The desert stretched endlessly, a canvas of scorched gold beneath a merciless sun. Heat shimmered above the dunes like spirits too tired to rise. Rick Malla stood alone, dust coating his jumpsuit, goggles reflecting the blinding sky. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of sand under his boots and the low hum of the salvager drones skimming beside him. Rick had been out here for 7 months. Dumped on this forsaken planet after refusing to trade Earth's tech schematics to a colonial syndicate, he'd chosen exile over betrayal. Survival here demanded more than grit. It required creativity, a mechanic's instincts, and a refusal to lie down. Every bolt salvaged from broken wrecks, every drop of water filtered from the air mattered. He built tools from wreckage, powered a half-dead generator with solar reflectors, and bartered his repairs for dehydrated food from passing smugglers. This morning was different. As the sun clawed upward, he spotted shapes on the horizon, dark, unmoving, unfamiliar. Wreckage? Scavengers? He narrowed his eyes and adjusted the drone's course. The signal showed no power signatures, no comms traffic. Whatever it wasn't broadcasting. The terrain flattened as he approached. The shapes became clearer, 2 forms lying low on the sand, something about them unnerving. He stopped a dozen meters short, his hand hovering over the plasma tool at his hip. They were creatures. Alive. Barely. Large, reptilian bodies heaved shallow breaths. Black scales shimmered like obsidian cracked under strain. They were bound, thick rope coiled around limbs, wings, necks, pinned to crude sleds of wood and metal. Muzzles locked their mouths shut with forged iron rings laced with glowing threads. The creatures twitched but didn't move. Dragons? Not the mythical kind, but alien, engineered maybe, or bred from something ancient. They had ridged brows, spiraled horns, and eyes like molten copper. One lifted its head slightly as Rick stepped closer, its pupils contracting sharply. Not dumb beasts. Aware. Alert. Watching. Rick stayed cautious, reading the scene like a machine diagram. The rope wasn't local, he knew the fibers. That was Starliner cargo netting, cut and repurposed. The sleds were built from broken pallets and ship deck panels. Someone had done this intentionally. Someone had left them. He took a slow breath. Who tied you here? No answer, of course. But one dragon's tail twitched. Not random. It was like a signal, a test of sorts. Rick circled, inspecting the knots. The restraints weren't just cruel, they were designed to suppress. Embedded in the rope were sensor chips, likely reacting to strength surges. The creatures had been left to die in heat, unable to move or call for help. He found a bowl nearby. Bone dry. He knelt beside it, brushing sand aside. The imprint showed it had once held water or liquid nutrients, days ago. The creatures were still alive out of sheer will. Rick stood again, looking down at them. One dragon bared its teeth but didn't lunge. Its body was shaking from dehydration, its claws twitching with restraint. The other wheezed, eyes unfocused, heat-blind. Walking away would be easy. He'd done it before. Refused entanglement. But this, something about their condition hit differently. Maybe it was how their bodies had been engineered to be powerful, majestic, and yet they'd been brought so low. Maybe it reminded him of Earth's old war dogs, loyal, forgotten when no longer useful. He didn't speak again. Just pulled out his belt cutter and approached the restraints. The creatures tensed but stayed still. One eye locked on him, fierce and unwavering. Rick sliced the first rope, careful not to trigger the embedded surge lines. The second took longer. Some of the knots had fused under heat. His hands worked fast, precise. When he finally removed the muzzle from the first creature, it didn't roar or lash out. It just exhaled, a long, shuddering breath, and collapsed to the side, unconscious. The second one groaned weakly. Rick looked it over, saw the cracked lip, the scorched scales along one flank. They'd both been beaten before being left out here. Not just abandoned. Punished. He clicked the beacon for his drone to summon the sled. He didn't care what this was anymore, military experiment, royal asset, genetic freak show. Whatever it was sentient, and it had been left to die in the sun. As he loaded the first dragon onto the sled, it shifted its head slightly toward him. Not to bite. To look. That gaze stayed with him even as he hoisted the second one. It wasn't gratitude. It was understanding. Recognition. He adjusted the coolant tarp over them, tapped the drone to begin slow return. The silence resumed as the desert stretched before them again. Behind them, the sand covered the ropes. As if nothing had happened. The dragons remained unconscious during the trip back. Rick adjusted the cooling tarp over them, monitoring their vitals through a patched-together sensor pad salvaged from a downed medical pod. Their body temperatures were too high, muscles stiffening from prolonged restraint. He'd seen engines fail under less pressure. Organic or machine, neglect killed the same way. Back at his outpost, a repurposed maintenance bay buried beneath the dunes, he lowered them onto a reinforced repair slab. The structure creaked under their combined weight, but held. Rick dimmed the lights to minimize stress, then approached the first dragon with slow, measured steps. He started by inspecting the muzzle rings. The locking mechanism was fused, sealed with a substance that responded to biosignals, clearly not intended to be removed by non-authorized handlers. Rick didn't bother with finesse. He overrode the core with an EMP spike, and the ring disengaged with a soft hiss. The dragon stirred but didn't rise. Underneath the muzzle, the creature's mouth was cracked and dry. He gently pried it open and poured in slow streams of purified water. It didn't resist. The throat muscles flexed, swallowing automatically. The other dragon, slightly smaller, was more alert. Its golden eyes flicked open and tracked Rick's every movement. It didn't growl, but its nostrils flared each time he neared. The wariness wasn't blind aggression, it was caution, intelligence behind the eyes. Rick didn't speak. No words would matter yet. Instead, he crouched and began to untangle the harness binding its rear leg. Under the restraints, Rick found bruising and embedded glassy fragments, probably from a broken scanner tag. He sterilized the wound and carefully removed each shard using forceps and a magnifying lens. The creature didn't flinch. It watched him the entire time. He crafted a brace for the fractured limb using adjustable clamps and padding ripped from an old atmospheric filter. It wasn't elegant, but it redistributed weight. Once fitted, the dragon tested it gently, stretching the joint, then settling without sound. Rick stepped back and studied both creatures under full scan. Their anatomy wasn't entirely reptilian. The wings were supported by jointed bone structures laced with carbon fiber-like tendons, and their neural responses were too fast for unmodified organisms. These weren't just animals. They were engineered, enhanced, possibly biosynthetic in origin. Their backs bore ports, subtle, seamless. He connected a diagnostic probe. The data stream that blinked to life stunned him. Encrypted telemetry, identification beacons, rank signals. Royal Guard Class 6. Status compromised. Loyalty coding active. The creatures had been bonded to someone of high command, possibly royalty. And yet they had been discarded. Chained and left to rot. Rick didn't ask why. He didn't speculate. He did what he always did, repair what could still function. He went to the side console and activated the thermal regulators in the chamber, dropping the ambient temperature 5 degrees to stabilize their recovery. As he returned, he noticed movement. The alert dragon, smaller but sharper, reached out slowly with a claw. It wasn't an attack. The claw nudged a nearby hydrospanner toward him. Rick paused, staring at the tool, then at the dragon. The message was clear. It had watched him fix things. And it understood. Rick accepted the spanner without a word. The dragon shifted back, laying its head down. Not asleep, just at ease. A fragile trust was forming. Not out of debt. Something deeper. He spent the next hour reconnecting vital fluids through a custom-fitted hydration line. Monitoring vitals, he adjusted their positions to avoid nerve pressure. They didn't resist him anymore. One even exhaled softly when he applied a cooling salve to its burned flank. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with an unspoken tension, a recognition of purpose. They'd survived cruelty. He'd survived exile. In that overlap, a bond was forming, not by command, but by choice. Rick leaned against the wall finally, arms crossed, sweat trailing down his face. His outpost, once a haven for broken drones and rusted circuits, now held two living, breathing enigmas. He looked at them again. Breathing steady. Wounds cleaned. Eyes half closed but aware. They weren't safe yet, but they were alive. He muttered under his breath, more to himself than to them. I don't know what you are or why you're here, but you're not dying on my floor. Either of them moved. But the alert dragon's eye flicked toward him, then slowly blinked once. He understood. That was enough. The quiet hum of Rick's improvised generator faded under the sudden hiss of static. From the shadows, the smaller dragon stirred, throat glowing faintly with embedded tech. A thin beam of light emerged, forming a flickering holographic sphere above the workbench. Rick dropped his tool, stepping back cautiously as the projection expanded. A regal figure emerged, tall, armored, marked by intricate patterns of a language Rick didn't recognize. The voice that followed was broken Terran, mechanical and urgent. Guardians compromised. If receiving this, encryption failsafe breached. I am Prince Verex of House Kalian. These dragons are bonded. Trusted. Protectors of the bloodline. Rick narrowed his eyes. The message continued, skipping slightly. Betrayed during orbit descent. Assassination attempt, palace guard turned. They shielded me. Bought escape window. Saboteurs assumed them dead. They were left in the furnace expanse to perish. The light dimmed, but the message pulsed again. The prince reappeared, gaze steady even through distortion. Coordinates encrypted. Embedded in neural link. Reach vault. Restore beacon. For the throne. For unity. The hologram vanished. Silence returned, heavy. Rick looked at the dragons. They were watching him. No growling. No fear. Just waiting. He pulled out a scanner and swept across their cranial ridges. Faint signal spikes aligned with the message, data nodes hidden deep within. He decoded a segment. Coordinates. A buried structure out past the dune reaches. Great, he muttered. Royal family dragons with classified data in their skulls. The implications were massive. If the prince had survived, these dragons weren't strays. They were key witnesses, proof of betrayal. In most systems, that would mean war. But here, it meant something more immediate, a bounty. Whoever staged the coup would want them dead, and anyone helping them erased. Rick didn't ask why the coup happened. Royal politics weren't his world. But he knew what it meant to be thrown away, discarded by systems you once trusted. He sat down heavily on the bench, staring at the sand-blown horizon visible through the outpost slats. The desert wasn't going to help. The vault was buried under kilometers of uncharted terrain. The dragons weren't at full strength. And Rick had a half-broken rover, barely functional drones, and no weapons beyond a modified plasma cutter. Still, he couldn't ignore what he'd just seen. He looked again at the creatures, their posture stiff but focused. No threat in their eyes. Only purpose. You were soldiers, he said quietly. You didn't run when it went bad. You stayed. Thought. Got left for dead. The larger one shifted, a subtle move of the shoulder plates, as if acknowledging his words. The smaller leaned slightly forward, gaze locked with Rick's. A whisper of old memory touched him. The last time he trusted his team back in the Terran fleet, before they sold him out to protect a trade deal. He hadn't broken. Just walked away. But now, watching these dragons, the bitterness felt lighter. He stood. Grabbed a datapad and began mapping out a route. If they moved at night and conserved coolant, they could cross the reaches in 2 days. The vault entrance, if it still existed, would need decoding. He had tools. He had skill. And now, he had reason. The dragons didn't wait for instructions. As Rick powered up the pad, they began adjusting their positions near the sled, instinctively preparing for transport. Not just following, they understood. They were acting in tandem. Discipline that came from training, not force. Rick was no royal guard, no savior. But he had hands, tools, and the one thing most systems forgot mattered: choice. He checked the sensor again. Minimal patrol signals, but one moving fast. A scout drone. Not local. Likely searching for heat signatures. That meant someone new. He moved faster, activating the sled's core, checking bindings, reinforcing the mount points. Every movement precise. Intentional. Not for profit. Not for revenge. For them. As he strapped the smaller dragon in, it turned and exhaled softly. A gesture. Not gratitude. Recognition. Rick met its eyes and nodded. We move before the sun breaks. No promises. Just a path. And for the first time in years, he wasn't fixing broken metal. He was keeping something alive. Fighting for something real. Not for the crown. Not for glory. But because no one else would. Because that's what humans do. When others abandon, they rebuild. When machines give up, they patch and press forward. And when two dying guardians ask for help in silence, they answer. The desert was a death trap by day and a furnace by night, but Rick didn't waste time complaining. The sled was rigged with a power stabilizer pulled from a wrecked mining rig, and the navigation console, tied directly into his scanner goggles, fed a real-time topographical readout to avoid unstable ridges. The dragons traveled without protest, keeping low, their claws wrapped tight against the cargo harnesses he had adjusted for their frames. He'd added a shield node over their vital organs using stripped cruiser plating and synced the output to the sled's reactor to reduce thermal overload. They moved as one unit, silent, efficient, purposeful. By the second night, they reached the edge of a jagged canyon, deep cracks splitting the sand like old scars. The entrance to the buried structure lay beneath. Coordinates matched. Rick knelt, palms brushing the gritty rock surface, and located a faint magnetic pulse. Below them, ancient tech still pulsed weakly. Something was down there. He set charges around the perimeter, directing the blast inward. The ground cracked open, revealing a narrow descent shaft. Air gusted upward, stale, electric, unbreathable. The dragons didn't hesitate. They descended behind him with calculated steps, tails curled inward for balance. Below, twisted columns rose from the dust, framing a forgotten chamber lit by a low, pulsing blue. Rick's boots hit solid metal. He scanned the space, half collapsed. Time and weather hadn't been kind. In the center was a sealed pedestal housing a crystalline beacon, blackened at its edges, dormant. Its containment shell was locked with 3 redundant encryptions, none compatible with Terran code. Rick didn't waste time. He dropped to one knee and rewired a microsplicer to bypass the core using redirected voltage. A jolt triggered the interface. The pedestal lit faintly. The beacon flickered. The dragons watched silently, crouched low, eyes never blinking. The silence didn't last. An alert pinged on Rick's wristband, unknown transponder, moving fast. Seconds later, a low-pitched hum filled the chamber, followed by the scream of repulsor lift engines. Above them, the drop shaft flooded with light. A mercenary vessel hovered, ramp opening midair. Figures dropped in, 5 armored operatives, armed with alien arc rifles and reinforced helmets. Rick didn't panic. He reached into his vest and triggered a fail-safe wired to the beacon core. Sparks shot out as the energy grid surged. The room's lights burst. Smoke filled the air. The dragons moved first. One surged forward, wings flaring just enough to throw off the attacker's aim. The second lunged at the side, intercepting a soldier mid-turn, claws tearing through armor. Rick ducked behind a control panel, fired up his modified exhaust igniter, and hurled it toward the center. The heat valve ruptured mid-flight, igniting a pressure burst that blinded 2 of the mercs. Fire licked up the chamber walls. One attacker raised his rifle toward Rick's flank. The smaller dragon intercepted, barreling into him with enough force to dent the wall. Rick scrambled for the beacon, rerouting its stabilizer manually. It surged to life, glowing deep gold. Signal burst initiated. The lead merc charged. Rick caught the motion and slammed a power cell into a utility socket, arcing a field of electricity across the floor. The attacker convulsed, armor shorting out. The larger dragon pounced, jaws clamping down with surgical precision. Within minutes, it was over. Breath ragged, Rick steadied himself. The beacon's glow intensified. A signal pulsed upward, straight into orbit. No more hiding. They'd been seen. He turned to the dragons, bloodied but upright, one limping, the other scorched across the shoulder. They didn't whine. They didn't pause. They stepped beside Rick, forming a triangle. He rechecked the uplink. Signal confirmed. Destination registered. House Kalian Loyalist Node. A sound rumbled above. A shape pierced through the upper haze, a vessel breaking cloud cover, angular and silent. No insignia. No weapons visible. Not mercs. Reinforcements. Rick holstered his gear and wiped grime from his brow. He didn't smile. There was still more to do. But the transmission had gone out. The dragons had survived. And the enemy had failed to bury them in the sand. This wasn't a rescue. It wasn't revenge. It was repair. Hard, exact, necessary. Rick looked once more at the wreckage, the beacon, the two creatures beside him. Something had been restored. Not just a signal. Something deeper. Something earned. The ship landed without fanfare, its landing struts pressing into scorched stone as the ramp lowered. Rick stayed still, eyes narrowed, pulse steady. The dragons held their ground, tails low, wings slightly spread. A single figure descended, tall, armored, face hidden behind a sleek helmet bearing the faded crest of the House Kalian. As he stepped closer, the dragons moved. Not to attack. Not to shield. They paused halfway, then lowered their heads. The figure removed his helmet. Prince Verex. He looked older than the recording, worn, scarred, eyes sunken with time and conflict. His gaze locked onto the dragons first. They did not rush him. They simply waited. Then, slowly, they stepped aside, revealing Rick. The prince's voice was low, rough from misuse. "You're not one of ours." Rick didn't bother with introductions. "No. Just a mechanic." Verex studied him in silence, eyes scanning the burns on Rick's sleeves, the blood on his hands, the scorched plating on the sled. He glanced down at the activated beacon. "You lit the flame." Rick shrugged. "It wasn't dead. Just buried." The prince walked past him, toward the beacon. His hand hovered over it, then dropped. "They should have been dead. That was the plan." Rick's voice was even. "Someone else's plan. Not theirs." One dragon stepped forward and pressed its head to Verex's chest. He placed a hand over its brow, not in command, but remembrance. Then turned back to Rick. "You knew what they were? Eventually. You knew what helping them meant? I knew no one else would." The prince considered that. "They were the last of the bonded. The others fell shielding me. These two didn't run. They never would have." Rick didn't flinch. "Neither did I." Verex gave a short nod. "We're rebuilding. The old court is gone, but remnants remain. I need loyal hands. People who don't break when the system does." Rick's arms crossed. "Not a politician. Don't want to be. I'm not offering a title. I'm offering a place." Rick looked at the dragons. One was watching him. The same way it did the first time, gauging, waiting. "I'll help fix what's broken. That's all. Then you've already earned more than most." The prince turned away, issuing silent commands to his ship through a neural link. Medics approached, scanning the dragons, but neither allowed them close. They stayed near Rick. He waved the medics off. "They stay with me until I say otherwise." No objection came. Later, when the vessel lifted, Rick stood at the edge of the ramp, wind slicing past. The horizon spread wide, desert still burning beneath a darkening sky. The dragon stood flanking him, battle-worn and unshaken. He didn't look back as the ship carried them into orbit. Time passed. Whispers of rebellion turned to stories. In backwater colonies and fringe stations, Tails grew of a Terran with no name who walked among fire beasts, wielding no weapon but a wrench and a will that bent metal and fate alike. They called him the Gearsmith, the silent fixer. No one knew where he came from. Only that when things broke beyond repair, he arrived. He turned down every offer to join the fleet. Refused formal rank. Kept moving. One dragon remained with him always, the smaller one. Quicker. Watchful. A shadow at his side. They traveled through shattered trade routes and collapsed mining towns, patching reactors, restarting orbitals, rerouting dying power lines across sectors no royal ship would reach. He never asked for payment. Only spare parts. And silence. The larger dragon stayed behind, guarding the prince as his throne returned piece by piece. When they reunited, it was quiet. No ceremony. Just a moment of recognition. A nod. A shared breath. Rick never chased legacy. But it followed him. In the archives of Kalian, a single record was logged under restricted royal classification. Designation * Terran civilian asset. Function * field mechanic, tactical improviser. Outcome * mission critical. Loyalty confirmed. Alias * wrench bearer. Companions * guardian class bionics, rebonded. No photo. No signature. Rick kept moving. He didn't fight wars. He ended breakdowns before they sparked. The dragons didn't serve him. They walked with him. Not by order, but because in a galaxy that left them for dead, he didn't. And in return, they made sure the stars remembered.